Welcome to Biztech's Enterprise Technology Show. Hi, I'm Brian Fernandez, and with us today we have Simon Berglund. He's the Senior Vice President and General Manager APAC at Diligent. Diligent is the leading governance, risk, and compliance SaaS company with over 1 million users, over 700,000 board members from 25,000 organizations. Rely on Diligent software to connect insights across governance, risk, compliance, audit, and ESG to drive greater impact and lead with purpose. Now, to tell us more, Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Now, Simon, for a start, could you give us perhaps a more in-depth explanation of what Diligent does and its footprint in the Asia-Pacific region?
Certainly. Look, your opening description of Diligent was excellent. I probably need to engage you for some marketing services in the future. But yeah, so, according to Forrester Research, we are essentially setting the standard for modern governance with our feature-rich, quote-unquote, GRC platform. Essentially, we are a global company, and our GRC competency is driven by a deep understanding of the landscape, powered by research conducted by our own Diligent Institute, looking into GRC issues of the day. We're headquartered in the USA, but we do have offices in Singapore, Australia, Japan, India, and as you say, almost 5,000 customers in 31 APAC countries. So we have a very big footprint in APAC.
I want to talk a little bit about something that boardrooms are increasingly concerned about: cybercrime. Now, APAC continues to be a hotspot for cybercrime. Boards across the region are just suddenly facing up to the pressure to think about cybersecurity and their approach to cyber risk management. Talk to us about how this is important to quantify these risks and maybe some of the solution. What are you seeing out there through your regional lens?
Right. Well, I mean, if we think about it, boards of directors are fundamentally responsible for ensuring good governance, which is powered really only by two categories of activity. One is good governance to ensure business continuity, and the other is strategic guidance to drive growth. Now, within the context of ever more elegant, threatening cyber risk, what this essentially means is a need for a more robust and informed security, but also resiliency practice. This is especially so in APAC, as you say, because according to the World Economic Forum, APAC has become the hotbed of cybersecurity risk in recent years. So whilst it's fair to say that there are some core precautions that must be observed regardless of the country in which you operate, such as those articulated in the Essential 8, for instance, out of the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, there are also individual country obligations that need to be taken into account and monitored. So quantification is hard because it can range from an amateurish $10,000 ransomware demand all the way up to a complete existential threat to your organization. So simply treating it as cyber as an afterthought is absolutely no longer a possibility. The options that you ask about, as in what are the types of solutions we're seeing in the marketplace, essentially where we are seeing the GRC industry go is a realization that there needs to be collaboration. Bad actors are collaborating, so the good actors also need to collaborate, and that means government, organizations, associations. Even within the same industry, there needs to be some collaboration to ensure that the solutions for the latest threats are arrived at sooner rather than later.
Now, Simon, because you have an Asia-Pacific remit and a wide remit at that, one of the key challenges facing compliance and governance and regulation is the fact that it varies so much across the region. So you have countries like Malaysia, Australia, Singapore, which has quite a high degree of, from a legal standpoint, that definition on cybersecurity and risk has been defined quite well. Awareness, however, is very, very different across the region. So you have the Thailands of this world versus the Singapores and Australia, very, very different. How would you categorize this, and how does a company like you go in and help companies in various markets across the region?
You're absolutely right. It's probably fair to say it's not just in GRC where there is differential awareness across countries, across professions around the, in this case, threats to their organization. The way we approach it is we try not to go in with a preconceived idea of what we need to be speaking with our prospective customer or even our existing customers about their current state. We really try to map their current cyber security and cyber resiliency practice against what we're seeing emerge from all our other customers around the world. So whilst it's true that, say, Thailand may be not as potentially elegant as other countries, it's also true to say that Australia is probably not as elegant as the USA, for instance, in its understanding of cyber threat and resiliency. So the way we try to approach this is to really have an open conversation with our prospective customers and customers around where they are, what we're seeing emerge, what they're seeing emerge, what the associations that represent them are seeing emerge, and combine that into a sort of a next step best response to where they are and where they need to get within that landscape.
Okay, Simon, I'm going to put a scenario in front of you. I'm going to wear the hat of a board member for a large conglomerate in Indonesia. I've got disparate businesses. And obviously now this is top of mind for all of us. I'm the chairman of the board. What are the steps that I can take to ensure that we possess the necessary expertise to stay on top of these evolving cyber threats, and also ensure that our priorities as the board are aligned with the IT leaders that we have in all the different subsidiaries and stuff, as well as the CISO of the group or the CIO of the group?
Right. I think it's probably fair to say that firstly and most obviously, boards should recognize their role in establishing cybersecurity, cyber resiliency as a top level governance issue, meaning that cyber risk discussions should be an agenda item on every board meeting, right? Because risk is ever present and cyber risk is ever accelerating. So there really is no room for complacency or taking a pause on that discussion. So what we are seeing is that the majority of boards still do not have what you would call the cyber interpreter between what the CISO or the CIO is saying and what the board and the majority of the members are experienced in order to make a decision, make a recommendation, ask appropriate questions, even to challenge what is being presented to them. So we're seeing a need for board member education and enablement to understand and be able to ask the right questions about cyber and anything that is presented to them in the board pack.
And Simon, can I then interrupt here, because this is such a specialized area? And for me, and I'm going to use that example of that Indonesian chairman of the board, and I'm looking around my colleagues and I'm realizing that, hey, we don't really have the necessary expertise to really make an informed decision. We're reliant so heavily on our CISO and the CIO of the company. Maybe one of the things that I need to do as a chairman is perhaps recruit board members with the right expertise to help us to bridge the gap.
100%. So it's quite similar to designing technology in and of itself. You either buy it or you develop it, or you do a combination of both, right? So a chairman can choose to buy in a new board member that has cyber expertise, and or they can choose an existing board member to upskill themselves in that topic and become that member. I would suggest that every board member, with the exception of potentially of the chairman, has to have some level of competent awareness of the kinds of dynamics and questions that need to be discussed around cyber because of its prevalence and acceleration.
So Simon, then that's an interesting point, because what you're now saying is, hey, again, using the chairman of the board, I need to send my board, and all of us probably need to get upskilled and go for a series of courses to really help us to navigate this landscape, which is only going to get more and more complex in the coming years.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that you come at this from this angle, because in recent times we've done two things at Diligent. We've actually introduced board member certification courses, and they're one of the fastest growing areas of our business, where they can actually educate themselves and become certified in cyber and risk management, as well as AI, for instance. We may get to that topic later. The other change we made is to help the CISO and the CIO frame their commentary into the board, their content into the board, in a way that a board member understands. Because typically, a board member comes at it from a financial or accounting background, and the CISO and CIO comes at it from a tech background. And those two don't always meet in the middle, right?
So, in Asia, they have a thing called, there's a term for this called chicken and duck talk. And
Right.
literally, they're never the twain meet. It just goes the other way.
Yeah, exactly. So we're working on educating both sides of the coin to be able to have a conversation with each other that makes sense and that they understand.
Now, Simon, I want to turn to AI now. This is the buzzword, but it's a buzzword that is very, very important, because I'm going to refer back to what you said earlier. The bad guys are very well organized, and literally, the bad guys are organized crime now. It's not a lone wolf trying to do some cyber attack. This is organized crime with research, with huge resources behind it, and so forth. Now, they are already starting to use AI. Now, on the flip side, the defenders are already using AI, the good guys, in order to defend against the bad guys. Now, what's Diligent's overarching approach to integrating AI into its GRC solutions?
Okay. I think we need to set the foundation first to help directors and CXOs understand the scale and breadth of the problem here. So, I mean, AI is fundamentally needing to be looked at through four lenses. It is being used by your people in order to do their jobs. It is being used by your organization in order to support its own customers. It's being used by your suppliers in order to do a better job for you. But as you say, it's also being used by bad actors upon you, right? So with those four lenses, there are different risks that need to be understood and articulated. What we've done with AI is that we've integrated into the platform to essentially speed up and simplify the path to the outcome that the user is seeking when they're using that part of the platform. So, for instance, this could range from regulatory change monitoring to board book summarization. We've even got a capability to turn the board book into a podcast for, as you said earlier in our conversation, for the director on the go in the back of the car, wanting to listen into the board book. Interestingly, where we're seeing the most engagement is using AI to actually interrogate the content that you've created for the board, look at it within the context of the content you created for previous board meetings, and articulate the kinds of questions that the board may come back to you with because your narrative is weak or something is missing in your narrative compared to what you said before. So that's part of what AI is about, is the ability to ingest huge amounts of data and be able to provide some indication of context and insight into that huge volume of data. Finally, I want to say one thing, because very quickly this AI conversation within a GRC landscape conversation turns to trust. It turns to trust very quickly, because most users are accustomed to the reality and the stories of one's content being ingested by the AI and then being used for other entities using that AI. When we implemented AI in the Diligent One platform, we had three design principles in mind right from the beginning. First of all, propriety. So the content that a customer uses our AI on is never taken out and used to train the language model for other customers' AI. Each customer essentially gets their own AI model, and it stays contained within their instance. The other is transparency. So anytime that the Diligent One platform generates AI content, it's clearly labeled as such, so that the director or the CXO can tell what is and is not AI generated content. And then finally, choice, essentially. All of our customers have to actually choose to opt in to the use of AI, and then at any time they can choose to opt out. So, flexibility and clarity around the use of AI in the platform.
And I'm assuming then, Simon, that in the opt-in and opt-out, all the data is anonymized.
Exactly. It's tied to the fact that we only use the model for each individual customer's content. It never leaves that environment in order to train the system for all our other customers. Individual language model, so to speak.
So is there any sort of aggregation in terms of blinded data?
Only within, there's aggregation within the customer site,
Okay.
but not outside the customer site.
Okay, because that's really a key concern, of course, as a business leader,
100%.
that is a key concern for me. Simon,
Absolutely.
this has been a fascinating conversation. I think myself and the audience has learned a lot from this. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with, and key takeaways in particular?
Yes, thank you. I think we have to realize that cyber risk management and cyber resiliency is not the sole responsibility of IT, but it's a core organizational responsibility, including the board. And despite this apparently self-evident situation, only 5% of companies globally actually have a cyber expert on their board, touching on what we were talking about before. Now, given the widespread nature of cyber attacks, that's really quite an interesting and concerning statistic. And then circling back to my opening comments, it's also fair to say that a board is responsible for strategic guidance to drive growth, right? Studies have shown that companies that have a cyber expertise on the board generate almost 4 times higher shareholder value. So there's not only the advantage of managing risk, managing resiliency when you are actually the victim of a risk that you've identified, but it also ends up actually rewarding the company financially. And then finally, I suppose in essence, the need for a centralized management system to oversee all of the aspects of risk, not just cyber, but ESG, audit, compliance and ethics training, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of the aspects that control whether your organization stays compliant and above that drives toward growth and continuing success has to be done in a centralized place. And the best way for doing that is in a GRC platform. And of course, we'd love it to be Diligent One, but your listeners really should be looking to aggregate their holistic GRC obligations within the one view so that they can get a singular picture of their overall risk posture.
Simon, thank you very much for taking your time to be on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
We've been speaking to Simon Berglund. He's the Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia Pacific at Diligent. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to Biztech's APAC Enterprise Technology Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.